Well, like I've said, and Taylor, I'm going to do my best to stay right sort of here. So if I get out of line, do this. It is a delight always to be here. I want to especially thank Dwight and Amy for putting up with me. It's not. I travel a lot and stay a lot of places. Not very often do you get to stay in a place that you feel like you're in the middle of a Hallmark movie. Is that not true? Is this not the most beautiful thing in the absolute world? Except the dog hadn't come back and it hasn't snowed yet. So that's all Hallmark movies end that way. To be honest, I'm not sure I've ever watched a Hallmark movie. I don't know, for those of you who speak, I don't know if you've ever, Daniel, if you ever tried to get out of speaking or sharing a passage, and I really didn't want to, not because difficult, because I don't think it's difficult. I'm not sure you'll make the connection like I do. I've realized that not everybody's brain works like mine. And if you don't have anything to praise the Lord for, that's one of the things so hopefully you'll make the connection. We're going to be in Psalm 96 in a few minutes. But if you know me, we're going to start with two or three stories. I had graduated from Ohio State, and yet knowing that God wanted me on the mission field. So finally, I graduated a degree in psychology, so I was working on the docks at UPS, which is what you do with an undergraduate degree in psychology. I had to talk to packages and try to help them with their cargoes. But I knew the Lord wanted me to go to the mission field, so I knew I had to prepare. I won't go through that whole story, but ended up at Free Will Baptist Bible College at the time. And I told one of my friends who had graduated from the college that I was going there to study missions, and he said, "Oh no, you're going to have Kronk." Dan Kronk was my professor and mentor, and a man that I love deeply. But he was the weirdest man known to mankind. You would not believe this guy as professor. We went into class one day. I can't tell you the room number. It was on the second floor. You turn left and it was first class on the left. I don't remember what the class was, what subject it was. But we walked into class. He was sitting cross-legged on top of his desk. Had a little drum and had this white suit. It looked like Ice Cream Man with a little hat from, he had been a missionary in India for 25 years. And he never said a word to us. We all marched him. We're going, well, this is Kronk. It's, who knows? He never said a word to us. The bell rang, and when the bell rang to start class, he started playing that drum. And then he started singing in Hindi or Urdu or whatever language it was that he spoke. And then he talked about the drum a little bit and why he played it. And then he started talking about India and her people. And the more he talked, the harder he cried. Because he wasn't there anymore. His heart was broken, and it was broken for a people. And I remember as a student saying, "Lord, please break my heart for a people like you broke Mr. Kronk's." And he did. My dear friend Martin McPeak and I had gone. Mr. Kronk finally got throat cancer, and we went to see him. We knew that it would be the last time that we would see our hero and our mentor. He had a little tape recorder with a little microphone, and he'd hold it to his throat so he wouldn't strain his voice so he could talk to us. And he could talk about anything. I think he read 10 books every night. But we were getting ready to leave, and it was tough because we knew it was the last time that we would see this guy that meant so much to us, had taught us so much. And we were standing at the door, and we were trying to say goodbye. We couldn't hardly get the words out. And finally Mark says, and Mr. Cronk was crying, we were crying, and Mark finally said, it must make you proud that Neil and I are carrying on what you taught us. And he was from Michigan. He was very much a Yankee. He didn't beat around the bush. He goes, no, that's not why I was crying. And he said, you boys knew me, warts and all, and you still loved me. Well, then I completely lost it. Let me say to you, some of you know me, warts and all, and you still love me, and that means a whole lot to me. Let me tell you one other quick story. I don't know if any of you have ever heard the sermon by E.V. Hill. He was an African-American preacher. He's going to be with the Lord now. You can look this up. What's that web thing that you can watch movies and stuff? YouTube? I don't know much about it.
Why do you call that name?
No, the truth is, for years I was hooked on phonics. And I went through rehab. Now I'm hooked on YouTube. I spend hours on YouTube, much more than I should, but it's so much fun. Anyway, you can listen to this sermon on YouTube by E.V. Hill. He preached his wife's funeral. And he started this way. In Job 1:21, the Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of our Lord. What I want to talk to you this morning about is what I think should be a Christian's response to grief. The key word in that passage was not the Lord giveth. Aren't we glad that the Lord gives?
Amen.
We're not always so glad when he takes away. But the key word is blessed be the name of the Lord. Because he will give, but he also will take away. And the question is, will you still bless him when he does?
Amen.
So in Psalm 96, to me, this is the key. If I don't put these on, I will speak fuzzily. It says this, "Oh, sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the earth. Sing to the Lord, bless his name. Tell of his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous works among the peoples. For great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods, for all the gods of the people are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due to his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts. Worship the Lord in splendor of holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Yes, the world is established and it shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens be glad and let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in his faithfulness." By the way, that's not the first time we run across that song. We run across it in 1 Chronicles in chapter 16. David apparently had written the song. He'd given it to a choir leader, Asaph, to sing when they brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. And then again, he puts it in his song book, in the book of Psalms. It was during the Feast of the Tabernacles that they would sing this song. And I think that this song is how we respond to grief. We respond to grief with worship. Because the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name the Lord. Look what he says. Sing to the Lord, verse 1 and 2. Verse 3, declare his glory and his marvelous works. Verse 4, great is the Lord and greatly to be praised or feared. Verse 5, contrasted to other gods, they fall short. Verse 6, he is full of splendor, majesty, strength, and beauty. Ascribe his glory and strength. Ascribe his glory and bring offerings. In verse 8, verse 9, worship his holiness and tremble. Verse 10 through 12, all the earth will worship. Now, we have a problem. I've been in a lot of churches, and I am not sure who they were worshiping. I have a deeper problem. I've been in service, and I'm not quite sure who I was. Now, here's the problem. The scriptures say, if I can quote it, in John 4:24, for God is spirit, those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Right? We worship in spirit and truth. Here's the problem. We know truth. We're people of the book, right? We know truth. So when we sing, we know if it's truth or not. What I don't know is if you're worshiping him in spirit. Now, you go to some churches, they sing hymns, right? Some sing contemporary, some rocky. Yeah, they may sing heavy metal polka. I don't know. It's Christian heavy metal polka. But I don't know if you're worshiping. I can't tell that. It doesn't matter which genre. I don't know if you're worshiping in spirit. Here's my worry, my concern about the American church. I think we have lost our concept of God's glory. I was telling somebody, I was in a church in Alabama, and before the service, I was talking to a bunch of young people, and one little girl says, "Ooh, you talk fancy." I go, "Honey, maybe you need to get out of your county." Let me give you a fancy word. We have so anthropomorphized God. That is, we have made him so much like us that he's our friend. By the way, I'm glad he's my friend, especially in time of grief. But he's more than that. And I think we have made him so much our friend that we forget his majesty and his glory. And when we come to grieve, how do we grieve? In a Christian perspective, we give God glory. We bless his name because he gives and he takes away. Blessed be the name of our Lord. Amen. Now, I don't want to relegate worship to music. And sometimes that's what we do, right? We relegate worship to music. If you can live in this place and not walk outside and see the topography here, these beautiful mountains, and not have a sense of worship, I'm not sure I can help you. By the way, and Daniel and Danny are both here, and that's kind of strange. And one of those can explain this passage to you. I don't know what this passage means. But I remember writing I was writing one time and wrote about this. It says I think it's in Romans chapter 8, that all the earth is still under bondage. But one day, it's going to be released from its bondage to worship God. That's in the NIV, Neil's Incredible Version. And I said, I've been to the mountains of western North Carolina. I've seen sunsets in Brazil. I've looked at the beautiful rainforests in Africa, even the desert in Africa. I lived in the French Alps. I have seen some absolutely beautiful places. And if they're still under bondage, I remember writing I said, I would love to be here when that gets released. That's going to be all. Now, I don't know what but these theologians can explain it, but that's what I just read and believe what it says. So if you're in the middle of worship, oh, by the way, let me read something A.W. Tozer said. He said, the message of this book does not grow out of these times, but is appropriate to them. It is called forth by a condition which existed in the church for some years and is steadily growing worse. I refer to the loss of the concept of majesty from the popular religious mind. The church has surrendered her once lofty concept of God and has substituted it for one so low, so ignoble, as to utterly unworthy of thinking, worshiping men. She didn't do it deliberately, but little by little, without her knowledge, and her very unawareness only makes her situation more tragic. With our loss of the sense of majesty comes further loss of religious awe and the consciousness of a divine presence. By the way, he wrote that in 1961, or at least the book was published in 61. I don't think it's gotten any better. Maybe it's, there's things that speak to you. One of the things that has just really spoken to me is to recognize God's glory. In Perspectives, I taught Perspectives last week, and my section was the story of God's glory. But I think we've substituted that for something far less. It's one of the reasons one of the trends we are seeing in the church is a lot of young people are going to high church because they like the ritual and that sense of awe. And I think we've lost that. And I hope that you never ever lose that. So, if you're grieving, our response is to worship. I just don't know how people, again, can look at the beauty of this earth and not be in utter awe of who God is. My last trip to Africa, if you've ever gone to a place where there's not a lot of electricity and look up in the sky, you don't see what we see here in America. Do you ever wonder if God's aggravated at Edison? He made night for us to rest. We don't have to have night anymore. Right? But you go there, and the last time I was there, we had some folks with us and who had never seen anything like that. We took them out of town a little ways where there's zero electricity. I said, look up. And you literally can see the Milky Way. And one of the girls, college student, tears just start rolling down her face in utter praise and awe to the majesty of God. You might look this up on that YouTube thing. One of the boys we had in our dorm in Africa, his name is Ard, A-R-D, Louis. He was from the Netherlands, but he grew up in Africa. He is now a professor of theoretical solid physics at Oxford. I don't know what that is. He tried to explain it to me. I don't know what that is. When I was writing my dissertation, he said, Uncle Neil, your dissertation sounds fascinating. Art, I got online. I can't read the title of yours. I have no idea what you're talking about. But he has this video called Shook. And it's about how he merged, his love for physics and science and his love for God. And at the end, he says, when I discover new equations, I find God's glory. I go, if you can find glory in God's equations, or in these equations, certainly I can find them in these mountains. So, by the way, and you know my heart, and it's your heart here, it wasn't just worship for worship's sake. Look at verse 1. He says, sing all the earth. He says, Sing, in verse 2, and tell of his salvation. In verse 3, declare his glory among the nations. Verse 4, fear him above all other gods. Verse 7 and 5 and 7, all the families and peoples. Verse 6 and 9, all the earth worship. Verse 7 and 10, say among all the nations. It's not just about us worshiping. It's about us taking the gospel to other people that they might worship. And can I tell you what happens in Africa? I don't know if you know this. It also happens in Japan. And it also happens in Cuba. I've been to Cuba, it happens there. I've been in France, it happens there. People die and are grieving. Every day. And you know what they need? They need to understand about a God who comforts the brokenhearted, so that they can comfort those around them. Now, they grieve differently than we do sometimes. It's okay. But the same God that we worship here, we want other people to worship. I really do believe this, and I am biased, yes. If you don't like it, get over it. But when we become involved in God's kingdom, it helps our own grief. It helps us move, because we know, I said this last night, we of all people, we have hope. And I want all people to have hope. We sang a song. I was out in Oklahoma. Well, actually, there's a similar song George Jones sang. Remember that song, Who's Gonna Fill Their Shoes? The song we sang in Oklahoma was, I will be the one. I'll be the one to answer his call. And those around us are grieving. Who's going to fill the shoes of the one who left? Who's going to step in? I think that about my home church, which is very much the size of yours, maybe a lot of older people. And I'm going, who's going to fill their shoes? Who's going to be? One of the reasons I hate going to funeral homes, I realize I'm moving up the line. Right? But who's going to fill their shoes? Who's going to answer that call? To be the ones who step in to comfort those who need comforting. Guess what? It's whatever that next generation, you're the one who has to step into those roles. I'm going to come back in the fall. Some of you may not be here.
Amen.
I guess I'm coming back for prayer summit. Don't want to be making an assumption. But Daniel already asked me, so I'm safe. But who's going to step in? By the way, it's one of the reasons I work with young people. I'm too old to be working with young people. But I go back to Titus. Remember Titus? I don't know how he pulled this off. He said, I'll do this next Sunday. I want all the old ladies in church to come up here after the service. I want to see who comes. And he said, your job is to teach the younger ones. And to teach them this, how to love your husband, to love your children. Things that we think are natural. Karina said something very profound just a few minutes ago. She said, you know what my dad taught me? He taught me how to grieve. When we were little, we went to the funeral home. I learned how to grieve before I had to grieve. It's part of this process. It's part of what we go through, and it's our joy too when the Lord taketh away to bless His name. What do you do when you're in the midst of grief? You worship the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the glorious Lord and Majesty on high. And you recognize Him, and even in that passage you ascribe to Him His glory. I'm glad in those moments He's my friend.
Amen.
I really am. But I'm glad He's more than just a friend.
Amen.
I'm glad that even in my new book I talk about this. He even knitted me together in my mother's womb. He missed a stitch, but He was knit. Aren't you glad we serve a God? And by the way, when He was knitting me together, you know what He said? This is what He said. He said that I put you together in fear and wonder. Hey, here's what that means. You know, when we read about fear in the Bible, it's not that He's about to zap us and so we're scared. It is this sense of awe. So when He was knitting me together, He goes, oh, look at that. That's what I just did. By the way, He said that about you. And when I think about how He did that for me, because that's what He gave me, but one day He's going to take me to Himself. And I hope those that remain will have this sense of awe and wonder of a God who loved me, and they worship Him. And by the way, if you hear that I passed and you come to the funeral home, if you don't laugh, I have failed. I do. You know, I hope your Clint Morgan says, I want everybody to come in crying and leave laughing. I want you to, because I'm going to do a little jig. Well, listen, grief is hard. Grief's painful. But we serve a big God who loves us like nobody else and who comforts us so that, and for this reason, that we might comfort one another. Will you pray with me? Father, I've come to the end of my talk. My prayer is that you haven't come to the end of yours. So I would simply ask that you keep speaking. And I ask it in the sweet and powerful and yet wonderful name of Christ.